now definitely pass on the mantle of a prophet, you know, to our dear, elder brother. Like we met in our departmental seminar 2 or 3 years back. It was such a sweet experience to hear, Mr. Disanayake speak. It was sweet chiming. So, sir, Professor Disanayake will now show us Disha in Sanskrit, sense of direction. So naturally, sir, here you are. Most welcome in, sir.
Namaskar, and thank you, Professor Chidananda, because we met about 2 years ago, I think around 2019, and there I remember we mentioned that you are Chidananda and I am Dayananda, so we have something in common. And thank you, Professor Devabrata, for inviting me for this, because this is one of my pet subjects, talking about democracy or what we believe is democracy. So, to start, on the 24th of April 1974, the following obituary appeared in the Ceylon Daily News in response to the government's decision to nationalize the independent newspapers of Sri Lanka. The obituary read like this: Ocracy. The death occurred under tragic circumstances of D.E.M. Ocracy, beloved husband of T. Ruth, loving father of L.I. Bertie, Faith and Justicia, interned on Saturday, 20th April instant. It had been written by a social activist, Dr. Riley Fernando, and this obituary or similar ones appeared in Indian newspapers several times after that, whenever there was a threat to what they believed to be democracy. This was really based on the belief that democracy had been alive, that it was beneficial for mankind, but in reality, democracy had never existed, was stillborn, or died in infancy. Since then, we have been worshipping either a Kadawa or a ghost, refusing to accept its death or non-existence. What Abraham Lincoln considered as democracy has always been, in truth, by a few people, for the few people, but never for the good of the majority of the people. But my favorite quote about democracy is by H.L. Mencken. Democracy is a form of religion. It's the worship of jackals by jackasses. Those who still believe in democracy have created the Democracy Index. It is published by the Economic Intelligence Unit of the Economist Group UK. The index is self-described as intending to measure the state of democracy in 167 countries, and the Democracy Index of 2020 ranked Norway at the top with 9.81 points, Iceland 9.37, and North Korea at the bottom 1.08, Democratic Republic of Congo 1.13. India is 53rd in rank at 6.61 and Sri Lanka 68th with 6.84. Then there is another index, the Democracy Dictatorship or DD Index, referring to the binary measure of democracy and dictatorship. In a democracy, the government has less control over how people spend their time and what they believe. In a dictatorship, the government tightly controls all aspects of the state and will often ban or tightly control groups and meetings. A dictatorship completely disregards the rights of individuals, citizens. And the DD index, based on 2008 data, ranks Denmark at the highest point with 0.958, and lowest was Eritrea, 0.017. India at 0.564 and Sri Lanka at 0.54. Now, does this mean our two countries are in between the devil and the deep blue sea? Because what is democracy and what is dictatorship and what lies in between? The carrion flower, by any name, stinks like rotting flesh. In the same way, governance by any name, democracy, communism, oligarchy, aristocracy, or whatever, is just as evil, causing intolerable pain and suffering for the people by a few people who are selected by a majority or are self appointed. But why do we need governance? And who benefits from governance? Because under any good governance, there could not be any discrimination based on birth, skin color, language, religion, or gender. Over the past few millennia, there had been, I'm not sure whether there had been any country or people who have not suffered under some form of governance. In 2019, during the Vesak conference organized by the UN in Vietnam, a Sri Lankan Buddhist scholar, Venerable Kritigama Vanarathanathera, summed it up like this. No political system can bring about happiness as long as the people in the system are strongly influenced by greed, hatred, and delusion. That is why I always believe in anarchy. Today, anarchy has become a dirty word, though in the 16th century it had only meant the absence of government. Today, it is considered as a state of disorder, as a rebel state. A very good example is from Bhutan. When we think of Bhutan as a promising example of a successfully growing democracy, because we thought it is an exception, they had been isolated in many ways from all the greed and corruption, both from the West and even from their neighbors. They had been under the governance of a benevolent monarchy, backed by a population who really enjoyed somewhat the gross national happiness that they believe in. They were satisfied with what they had, from the state officials to the street vendor. Let us hope and pray they would continue to be so, that their politicians would not become hungry for power and wealth, leading to total corruption and the death of the infant democracy. When democracy was offered by the king of Bhutan, there was much dissent. One poet wrote, "Democracy divides people." Perhaps he was thinking about Sri Lanka as an example. This is what happened to us in Sri Lanka because, in the name of democracy. All Sri Lankans struggled for independence from the colonials together as one family. There was no conflict, no discrimination among the people. We thought of Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, as one country. But with the so-called independence and a democratically elected parliament, our politicians began to create division, suspicion, and hatred among us people, getting us to fight with each other. Conflicts began based on language first and then based on religion. Politicians organized their political parties and the government allowed it, and these parties were formed based on their ethnicity, on their language, on their religion, and even on caste. And because of this, we suffered many riots, many unfortunate violence, and a 30-year war, which, though it has stopped, it's not an end to that problem. There were thousands of innocent children, women, and young people who died and who are still suffering, all thanks to the democratic political system. All the evil found in the world among the ancient humans probably started with the claim of property and wealth. Before the advent of agriculture and domestication, man would have had complete freedom. He could find something to eat when he felt hungry. He did not have to toil from morning to night to grow more food because he had plenty. And whenever he could find something, he could eat it. And he would also share what he had with another who did not have. There would have been enough food for all the living creatures in Eden, as Mahatma Gandhi also mentioned. And just as man did not have to work to grow his own food, he did not have to enslave another in one form or another. There would never have been a need to live together in large communities. Each man or each family could fend for themselves. Then there would not have been need for leaders or rulers or employers. There would have been no politicians and no wars, no corruption, no crime at all. May I humbly suggest that you read again the Buddhist Sutta, Aggarna Sutta in the Digha Nikaya of the Tripitaka, which describes in a way evolution of the universe and of living beings, especially human beings. In the beginning, the beings were feeding on delight, self-luminous, moving through the air. They were glorious, and they stay like that for a very long time. And after a very long period of time, savory earth spread itself over the waters where those beings were. It looked just like the skin that forms itself over hot milk as it cools. It was endowed with color, smell, and taste. Then some beings of a greedy nature tasted the savory earth on its finger. In so doing, it became taken with the flavor, and craving arose in it. Then other beings also tasted the stuff with their fingers, and craving arose in them. So they set to consuming it with their hands, and so on. Then, because of overconsumption, the savory earth disappeared, and in its place there was a fungus-like growth, which also was delicious. So the beings started consuming it. Then there came some kind of creeper, which also they consumed. And with all this, and with the increase in greed and craving, their self-luminance disappeared. As a result of this disappearance, their bodies became coarser, and a difference in looks developed among them. Some beings became good-looking, others ugly. And the good-looking ones despised the others, saying, "We are better looking than they are." And so differences among human beings started appearing. Then later, rice appeared, and the original rice could be consumed as it was because there was no husk and it could be consumed raw. And people plucked just the amount of rice they needed for the meal. But then some greedy person thought they would collect more rice so that they could have it the next day too. Then another would collect more rice for consumption for 2 or 3 days, and so on. And they started gathering and collecting and possessing. Then they started growing their rice, and then the land where they grew the rice or whatever plants, they started claiming as their own. Then people started fighting for land, fighting for possessions, and all this resulted in lying, in grasping, possessing what did not belong to them. They used force and violence against each other. When the criminal acts and evil acts started growing, they wanted to appoint a certain being who would show anger where anger was due, censure those who deserved it, and banish those who deserved banishment. And in return, we would grant him a share of the rice. So they went to the one among them who was the handsomest, the best looking, the most pleasant and capable, and asked him to do this for them in return for a share of the rice. and he agreed. This person was called Mahasammata, the choice of the people. Perhaps that is what democracy may have been at the time. But even today, we often select the handsomest, the best looking, or the one who talks most convincingly, ignoring his capabilities and honesty. And Mahasammata, though originally elected, later they too became greedy when they began to enjoy their power and wealth, manipulated to retain power within their family. That is unfortunately how later history began to talk about Mahasammata dynasty. They were no longer the choice of the people. Then also about democracy, Bhiksu Buddhadas from Thailand, I have high regard for him because he defined Buddhism in just 4 words: be peaceful and useful. But his concept of Dhammic socialism, or what later was called Buddhist socialism, too failed in providing good governance. In his own words, in the Theravada Buddhist culture of Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, the most prominent political leaders espousing the rhetoric of Buddhist socialism were SWRD Bandaranaike, who became the Prime Minister in 1956 in Sri Lanka on a platform of Buddhist socialism, and U Nu, the Prime Minister of Burma, and Prince Sihanouk in Cambodia. We need not go into details about Sri Lanka, where Bandaranaike's policy of Sinhala language only led to the 30-year ethnic conflict. We are very much aware of the situation of Rohingya people in Rakhine State and the sad tale of Cambodia, where this Buddhist socialism also failed. Unfortunately, I have no confidence in any form of governance we have, so I believe human society is beyond redemption. Whether we accept civilization as sick, as Carpenter said, or we were the victims of the Lucifer principle described by Howard Bloom. It was in 1889 that Edward Carpenter published Civilization, Its Cause and Cure. And he said that civilization is a disease, and he summarized it that we will never be able to cure ourselves and become healthy once again. And 2302 years afterwards, we are at terminal stages of this cancer, and all forms of governance had failed, and there is no cure, no medicine discovered so far. Then Howard Bloom also argued about these superorganisms, and where the larger group, and these groups are primarily units of selection, not genes and human psychology. So even if we believe in these superorganisms, it's only a few organisms within that control the superorganism. That is called the Lucifer principle. Recently, I did a study of Vishakadatta's Mudra Rakshasi. He may not have realized he was portraying the most evil form of political animal, Zoon Politikon, in the role of Chanakya. This political animal, who has evolved or in fact degenerated from the human Homo sapiens into a new subspecies, has given the process of the survival of the fittest a new meaning. Among the normal Homo sapiens, survival of the fittest would continue in the same manner as for the rest of animal and plant life on earth. But those who are physically and mentally healthier, who could survive and coexist within a stable system, would not happen. And with the political animal, overcome with greed for power and wealth, the survival depends on the total lack of moral and ethical values, degree of selfishness, sadism, and apathy. Zoon Politikon was never concerned with his fellow beings, human or animal, or about the environment. recorded history always created by those who were ruled by the political animal shows us that there is a Chanakya in every one of these beasts. There is no room for survival of the more human, honest, sympathetic creatures like Rakshasa, the minister of the Nandas. Among the politically ambitious, soon Politicon, there is also the Bhasmasura. He will continue till the day he turns this universe into ashes completely. And this brings us to the question of why Vishakadatta wrote this play. He would not have written it for the enjoyment of the common people. Because for the common people, the South Indian saying is there, whether Rama rules or Ravana rules or the monkey that came along rules does not matter. For them, whoever ruled would not be of any benefit to them, and they would remain in poverty, continue suffering, whoever governed them. And also in the Mudra Rakshasa, we find that very often the ruling party or ruling power always depended on either some professional person or someone who was more intelligent, who could control them. And that is what Chanakya did. And according to the Mudra Rakshasa drama, Chandragupta was just a puppet under Chanakya. But we find this even today. In the 20th century, we had millionaire Warren H. Beecher, who manipulated several US presidents, as it is revealed by Lieutenant McCartney in Friends in High Places, how they manipulated for all business advantages whoever was in power in America. There is another book, Friends in High Places, Who Runs Britain, by Jeremy Paxman, about the old boy network in Britain who always has been and is running Britain. Paxman also wrote The Political Animal. These books are all about great democracies in the world. And whatever the form of governance, Mudraksha brings out another thing. One person, if he was very cunning and very wild, he could change the fate of the world, fate of the history, as Chanakya did because he was insulted by the Nandas. And it happened in the 20th century in democratic countries because one man caused the two world wars, followed by the Cold War. It was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Serb nationalist who assassinated Austria's Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, and it caused the First World War. And it continued killing 13 million people. And the Second World War, which was also a result of this continuing conflict, resulted in over deaths of 50 million people. And we are still fighting with each other. The world is not at peace. And to bring peace, they formed the United Nations Organization in 1945. But they have failed pathetically all over the world, probably because the office bearers of this organization had never been elected democratically. So then we come to the other issue of dissent. We have a record of dissent throughout our known history. Sometimes it would have been due to genuine grievances or unequal treatment, suppression of rights, and free speech. But like democracy, free speech and the freedom of expression are all myths. All news and digital media are owned by the state or by big business. This means dissent too is monitored, controlled, or manipulated. At some stage, a non-violent, harmless dissent could be hijacked by a group, leading to a violent overthrow of an existing regime. But in the end, the people who really had a reason to dissent end up in an animal farm. Whether dissent leads to violence or not It is the innocent, honest, selfless, brave young women and men who end up dead or imprisoned. We have heard of such tragic situations in the ancient past and more recently too. The nearest to us was in Bangladesh in 1952 and further away in China, Tiananmen Square in 1989. Though Bangladesh youth won it at sacrifice of great life, Tiananmen Square youth, they didn't win anything. About freedom of speech, last year, that is 2020, there are recorded 62 journalists had been killed around the world, not in war zones, not where they were reporting on wars or conflicts, but trying to expose the truth. So many others were assaulted, injured, imprisoned, while many others sought asylum in other countries. Dissent also led to concentration camps. Stalin had the Gulag from 1930s, but he was called a communist dictator, not a democrat. Then George W. Bush opened Guantanamo in 2002, which is still in operation. He was the president of a country calling themselves watchdogs of democracy. When we think of concentration camps, perhaps almost every country, democratic or otherwise, have used them even for limited periods, except maybe a few countries like Iceland. And dissent is also about our rights. Even the United Nations is concerned with human rights. We have the UNHRC for human rights. But we are not concerned about our obligations and responsibilities. We do not have a United Nations Human Obligations and Responsibilities Commission. We only talk about rights. Even dissent is about our rights, but not about our duties or about our obligations. So there have been different proposals, different options, which I think I don't have time to talk about, but we have what is called a noocracy or aristocracy of the wise, which too has failed from the time of Plato up to now. So one example I can see is in Sri Lanka. Last year, they formed a committee of professionals and academics to guide the government. But it has very sadly failed, tragically failed over the last year because what these academics and professionals were, because they were specialized in very specific areas, so they had very narrow vision of the total picture, and nobody was there to look at the total picture. So that is what happens in noocracy. Or then there was a Georgetown professor, Jason Brennan, who talked about against democracy, but they are all just attempts to try to treat cancer in the latest terminal stages. So before I conclude now, I have been giving a totally negative picture, but I think there is still possibility of salvaging something. We have been blaming the world religions for most of the conflicts and violence around the world. But it is not the religion or the founders and leaders, but the pseudo fanatics who are creating the issues. It is their agents, the priests, who are responsible. If all mankind could try to understand the basic tenets of whatever their creed, if we could realize, recognize, and accept all are children of one God, O Brahma, O Mother Earth, if we can form a real Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we could do away with all forms of governance, including the mockery of democracy. So I think I had taken up extra time. So Thank you very much. Thank you for Rabindranath Bharat University and the Teachers Association for this opportunity. Thank you, everybody.